Hare Krishna everyone. So we'd like to give a warm welcome to His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami. He's here for just for today, but he's giving the morning class and also he'll be giving class in the evening. So if we could all give a warm welcome tomorrow. His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Maharaj Ki Jai.
As the lecture is based on Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, instead of chanting Jai Ram, I'll chant Sri Krishna Chaitanya Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Lila, chapter 16, texts 113 to 140. Gopyakimacharadayam kushalam svavenur.
Gopyakimacharadayam kushalam svavenur.
Damodaradhar Sudhamapi Gopikanam.
Damodaradhar Sudhamapi Gopikanam.
Bhukte Swayam Yadavashishta Rasam Harinyo.
Bhukte Swayam Yadavashishta Rasam Harinyo.
Krishnatvachoshumuchastaravo yathayaha.
Krishnatvachoshumuchastaravo yathayaha.
Before I read the translation for this, I will read the translations of verses 130 up to 139. A fragrance is describing Krishna's lips. A fragrance and taste that are uncommon and greatly enchanting and that make one forget all other experiences are attributes of Krishna's lips. This prasadam has been made available only as a result of many pious activities. Now taste it with great faith and devotion. Loudly chanting the holy name of Hari, all of them tasted the prasadam. As they tasted it, their minds became mad in the ecstasy of love. In ecstatic love, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ordered Ramananda Rai to recite some verses. Thus Ramananda Rai spoke as follows. O hero of charity, please deliver unto us the nectar of your lips. That nectar increases lusty desires for enjoyment and diminishes lamentation in the material world. Kindly give us the nectar of your lips, which are touched by your transcendently vibrating flute, for that nectar makes all human beings forget all other attachments. Upon hearing Ramananda Rai quote this verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very satisfied. Then he recited the following verse, which had been spoken by Srimati Radharani in great anxiety. My dear friend, the all-surpassing nectar from the lips of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, can be obtained only after many pious activities. For the beautiful gopis of Vrindavan, that nectar vanquishes the desire for all other tastes. Madan Mohan always chews pan that surpasses the nectar of heaven. He is certainly increasing the desires of my tongue. After saying this, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was overwhelmed by ecstatic loving emotions. Talking like a madman, he began to explain the meaning of the two verses. My dear lover, Lord Chaitanya said in the mood of Srimati Radharani, let me describe some of the characteristics of your transcendental lips. They agitate the mind and body of everyone, they increase lusty desires for enjoyment, they destroy the burden of material happiness and lamentation, and they make one forget all material tastes. The whole world falls under their control. They vanquish shame, religion and patience, especially in women. Indeed, they inspire madness in the minds of all women. Your lips increase the greed of the tongue and thus attracted. Considering all this, we see that the activities of your transcendental lips are always paradoxical. My dear Krishna, since you are a male, it is not very extraordinary that the attraction of your lips can disturb the minds of women, but I am ashamed to say that your impudent lips sometimes attract even your flute, which is also considered a male. It likes to drink the nectar of your lips and thus it forgets all other tastes. Aside from conscious living beings, even unconscious matter is sometimes made conscious by the lips. Therefore your lips are great magicians. Paradoxically, although your flute is nothing but dry wood, your lips constantly make you drink their nectar. They create a mind and senses in a dry wooden flute and give it transcendental bliss. That flute is a very cunning male who drinks again and again the taste of another male's lips. It advertises its qualities and says to the gopis, "O gopis, if you are so proud of being women, come forward and enjoy your property, the nectar of the lips of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." Thereupon the flute said angrily to me, "Give up your shame, fear and religion and come drink the lips of Krishna. On that condition I shall give up my attachment for them. If you do not give up your shame and fear, however, I shall continuously drink the nectar of Krishna's lips. I am slightly fearful because you also have the right to drink that nectar, but as for the others, I consider them like straw." The nectar of Krishna's lips combined with the vibration of his flute attracts all the people of the three worlds, but if we gopis remain patient out of respect for religious principles, the flute then criticizes us. The nectar of your lips and the vibration of your flute join together to loosen our bells and induce us to give up shame and religion even before our superiors. As if catching us by our hair, they forcibly take us away and deliver us unto you to become your maidservants. Hearing of these incidents, people laugh at us. We have thus become completely subordinate to the flute. This flute is nothing but a dry stick of bamboo, but it becomes our master and insults us in so many ways that it forces us into a predicament. What can we do but tolerate it? The mother of a thief cannot cry loudly for justice when the thief is punished. Therefore we simply remain silent. Such is the policy of his lips. Just consider some other injustices. Everything that touches those lips, including food, drink, or betel, becomes just like nectar. It is then called Krishna Fela, or remnants left by Krishna. Even after much prayer, the demigods themselves cannot obtain even a small portion of the remnants of such food. Just imagine the pride of those remnants. Only a person who has acted piously for many, many births and has thus become a devotee can obtain the remnants of such food. The betel chewed by Krishna is priceless, and the remnants of such chewed betel from his mouth are said to be the essence of nectar. When the gopis accept these remnants, their mouths become his spittoons. Therefore, my dear Krishna, please give up all the tricks you have set up so expertly. Do not try to kill the life of the gopis with the vibration of your flute. Because of your joking and laughing, you are becoming responsible for the killing of women. It would be better for you to satisfy us by giving us the charity of the nectar of your lips. While Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was talking like this, his mind changed, his anger subsided, but his mental agitation increased. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continued, "This nectar from Krishna's lips is supremely difficult to obtain, but if one gets some, his life becomes successful. When a person competent to drink that nectar does not do so, that shameless person continues his life uselessly. There are persons who are unfit to drink that nectar, but who nevertheless drink it continuously, whereas some who are suitable never get it and thus die of greed. It is therefore to be understood that such an unfit person must have obtained the nectar of Krishna's lips on the strength of some austerity." Again, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to Ramananda Rai, "Please say something, I want to hear." Understanding the situation, Ramananda Rai recited the following words of the gopis, which is the verse we just chanted, which I'll read now. "My dear gopis, what auspicious activities must the flute have performed to enjoy the nectar of Krishna's lips independently and leave only a taste for us gopis, for whom that nectar is actually meant. The forefathers of the flute, the bamboo trees, shed tears of pleasure. His mother, the river on whose bank the bamboo was born, feels jubilation, and therefore her blooming lotus flowers are standing like hair on her body." This verse quoted from Srimad Bhagavatam is part of the discussion the gopis had among themselves. As the autumn season began in Vrindavan, Lord Krishna was tending the cows and blowing on his flute. The gopis then began to praise Krishna and discuss the fortunate position of his flute. Vande Guru Nisha Bhaktam Isha Vishavatara Kamta Prakashas Tatat Shakti Krishna Chaitanya Sambhuta. Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodita Ajaranam Gajapujo Gajapujo Sankirtanai Vishwambharo Dvijavaro Dharmakala Vande Bhakti-Bhakam Krishna Bhakti-Rupa Swarupakam Bhakta-Avataram Bhakta-Kyam Namami Bhakta-Shaktikam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakti-Vinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Obviously, it's a very high subject. The Antya-lila of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita describes briefly some of the, or gives insights into the transcendental madness that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continuously exhibited during the last 18 years of his pastimes when he continuously stayed in Puri, relishing the nectar, rasasvana, tasting the nectar. And this particular section is specifically, literally, of him tasting the nectar, the flavor of Krishna Prasadam, which made him think of how has this food become so wonderful tasting. It's because it's mixed with the nectar of Krishna's lips, which made him think of on one occasion at least, of the flute of Krishna, which tastes the nectar of Krishna's lips, and then the gopis, their thoughts about the flute, and then this verse is quoted here, which we read today from the Venu Gita, in which the gopis are praising the flute, or Krishna's playing on the flute. So obviously these are very high topics. And one is only supposed to speak according to one's realization. So, who has realized these topics? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has realized. Radharani, who is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Madhavendra Puri, and that's about it. Sri Damodar. Very high topics. And so I'm going to speak rather than on the rasa vichar, or consideration of the transcendental rasas which are beyond my realization and probably beyond the realization of everyone else here. Speak on the underlying tattva vichar, or philosophical understanding, which is required to even begin to enter into these topics. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is supposed to be read, or Srila Prabhupada has recommended that after reading Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Chaitanya Charitamrita itself opens the first few chapters with a very detailed analysis of the position of Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara, Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakti-Vinda. Which is one of the reasons why Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is considered the most important biography of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Another reason is because it describes his highest ecstasies, such as these being described here. So, both philosophically and in terms of his ecstasies, which are specific characteristic of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. There are other reasons also. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is considered the most important of his biographies. Wondering the beauty of the language. The important underlying point here is Namasye Purusham Tvayam Ishwaram Prakriti Param Alaksham Sarvabhutanam Tantabhayavastitam. That this is all on Krishna is transcendental. Everything about Krishna is transcendental. It's beyond material energy. And therefore when hearing such before hearing such descriptions, such one should have solid grounding in understanding the transcendental position of Krishna and everything that Krishna does. Etam Ishanam Ishasya Praktisto Sto Vitakuran. Krishna is described his very godness is that even though apparently situated within material energy, he comes to this world. Now yujyate sadavasthaya. He is not within material energy, he's always transcendental. Yathabhutis tadashraya, and also his devotees and everything else concerning Krishna, it's all transcendental. Krishna is not a product of this material energy. Krishna is not to be understood in terms of the material energy. Krishna is only transcendental material energy. And also, most importantly, Krishna cannot be understood by material senses, material intelligence, or material analysis. One has to follow the path of the acharyas. To understand all these points, just like, for instance, Krishna's flute has been described here. What is the sound of Krishna's flute? We've all heard the sound of flute being played, and it may sound very nice, but however nicely a flute is played, that we have heard, it doesn't come anywhere near the descriptions of the flute playing of Krishna, in which it's described that Ananta Dev, he whirls around, not as elsewhere it's described, and all the three worlds become stunned. The gopis, all the women, their clothing becomes loose, and there are various descriptions of the flute playing of Krishna. And you wonder, well, just how well can anyone play a flute? There are expert flute players in this world, both in India and in the West. And if you hear maestro, you may wonder, well, how much more expert can Krishna be that it has such an effect? And such effect, so although music can be, it definitely has a very great effect on the consciousness. But we didn't hear of any music that had such effects as that of Krishna, the description which is given of Krishna's flute playing. So, what's going on here? What's going on is that the sound of Krishna's flute is a sound that is, in our present state of consciousness, unimaginable. What does Krishna look like? We say unimaginable. The descriptions are there in Shastra, so we can begin to visualize and understand, but actual understanding comes by transcendental submission, and when that is revealed to us, Atashi Krishna Namadi Nabhavan Grahya Indriyasi Hijivada Swami Vispurata. When Krishna reveals himself to us out of his mercy, then through the transcendental senses, we can appreciate Krishna. It's not exactly through the taste buds. The scientists can analyze how the food, through the biomedium of rasa, liquid, one cannot taste without liquid. Rasa is required for tasting. Through the biomedia of rasa, when the taste buds come in contact with the various chemicals which are there in food, then one can taste various tastes, but it's not exactly through the taste buds that we can taste prasadam on the spiritual platform. It's not through the scientists, again they'll describe an impression, the various objects of vision, an impression is made on the retina, and then turned upside down and upside down again, something like that, and in the brain and in the neurons, and then you see it. But we cannot exactly see Krishna by such a process. Krishna can be seen, touched, tasted, smelled and heard through the transcendental eye, ear, nose, skin, and what else? Eyes, ears, nose, and tongue. So this is how Krishna is to be appreciated. As we have heard, Srila Prabhupada was told when devotees would make detailed, they'd ask so many questions about what's it like in the spiritual world, Srila Prabhupada would say, well, you have to go there to find out. Descriptions, they give us some idea, but we have to go there to find out. Now I'm going to move on to a related topic regarding the nature of the spiritual world and our perception of it. What does Krishna wear? Well, according to Srila Prabhupada, Krishna, among other clothes, he wears a dhoti. There he is. And Radha and the other gopis wear a sari. Now, as one of my dear godbrothers, Hrdayananda Gosvami has often pointed out, these words, sari and dhoti, they don't appear in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in fact, they're not Sanskrit words at all. Although apparently sari is, I asked Pandit Sanskritananda, he's renamed himself for his love of Sanskrit. An acquaintance, come friend of mine. Is there any word? So he said Shatika. The word sari is derived from the modern word sari, which comes in pretty much every Indian language. Modern Indian language is derived from Sanskrit shatika, dhoti. Dhoti means to wash. I don't know what the root of that is. So does Krishna wear a dhoti? Well, maybe not, because the word is not even a Sanskrit word. And these specific words are not mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam or other scriptures, just cloth. Some terms like this are said. Srila Prabhupada consistently mentions Krishna's dhoti and the gopis wearing saris or other residents of the spiritual world. The word sari certainly comes in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is much later. And in Chaitanya Bhagavata, I believe this is described in Panchakach, which means the 5 folds which are which is considered the proper way to wear a dhoti. And even traditionally saris is considered proper. See the way the dhoti is tucked in at the back? Saris are also supposed to be tucked in, actually, according to the traditional system. However, it's not in Shastra, so Hrdayananda Maharaj contends that, well, quite possibly Krishna's not actually wearing a dhoti. So this is somewhat controversial. Maybe like myself, Hrdayananda Maharaj seems fond of controversy, and we're usually on the other side of the fence and battling it out. And I really like Hrdayananda Maharaj. I often listen to his lectures. And it seems that as long as one of us is here in this world, we're going to be arguing about something. And maybe if he goes back to the spiritual world, maybe we'll go on there too. I don't know. But actually, I'm going to speak about this now. Does Krishna wear a sari or a dhoti? I actually had a long conversation with him, about 2 hours with him. Just my phone pad ran out. But at the end, he accepted that. Well, my last shot, which was the best one, was on my. Is that whether Srila Prabhupada says that Krishna is wearing a dhoti? I'm pretty sure he is, because Srila Prabhupada seen Krishna. He said, yeah, but maybe he wears something else on other occasions also. So to which I contended, well, I'm pretty sure he's not wearing blue jeans. That's what I meant when the money ran out. So recently this topic came up again. I regularly to demonstrate other points actually that actually in one sense it's valuable that he brings these points up, because sooner or later we're going to have to contend with all of them. If he doesn't bring it up, then someone else will. So it can't be said like that. So the point I was making was that Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santa Sadaiva Hridayesha Vilopiyam Yang Shyama Sundaram Achintya Guna Swarupam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Lord Brahma declares in the course of offering his prayers to Govinda that persons whose eyes are tinted with the salve of love, they constantly see Shyamasundara, whose form is Achintya Gunaswarupam. Interesting. Inconceivable transit. His form is composed of inconceivable transcendental qualities. So that's an important word, inconceivable. In the description of Krishna, what does he look like? So the devotees, they always see him within their heart. And not only within the heart, what is that? Chaitanya Chaitanya. Jaha Nidra Kare. A couple of times mentioned that. Wherever the eyes of a devotee fall, they see. You got it there? I don't think it's in there. Wherever a devotee's eyes fall, in other words, whatever he sees the form of Krishna. Starva, there's another one. Starva Jananda Kena Denditam Vartisava Tamaita Ishtadeva Spurti. As a pure devotee, he doesn't exactly see the moving and non-moving forms of this world, but he sees always the form of his beloved God, his worshipful God. So this is my argument, that if Prabhupada sees Krishna like that, well, we can accept that Krishna is dressed, if Prabhupada says he's dressed as a devotee, I'm pretty sure he's dressed as a devotee. Of course, there's also historical analysis by which it's maintained that saris are relatively recent introduction in Indian culture. I'm not convinced fully by such historical analysis, which is based on seeing old sculptures and this and that. Because Indian culture, at least up until very recently, was pretty standard through thousands of years. Although it's not homogeneous, when you say in Indian culture, it's not that in every part of India everyone's exactly the same. The culture there There's a lot of variety within the culture. Styles of wearing saris, and not even every woman wears a sari. And then general usages, although again there are varieties too. It's generally what's the word for that? It's the system. Generally it's a patriarchal society, although in some parts, specifically in Kerala, which is a little strange always. Culture's always a bit different there. It's matriarchal. Like this. But more or less we'll find in Shastra, even in the descriptions of Krishna and his Leela, we can discover from this is more or less the same culture that goes on to the present day. And many of the usages and the points of understanding, the norms, normative behaviors, sociological terms, it's the same. It's just changed to a large extent recently with the introduction of mass media, and cinema, and TV, and all this kind of thing. Otherwise, much in the culture was pretty much it's the same culture. I was recently asked to give a lecture on India, ancient and modern. So I said that, well, ancient, a lot of what's ancient is still there. And modern, when we talk about modern, we're really just talking about very recently, because much of the culture has only changed very recently. Although throughout the course of Kali Yuga it has changed with the Muslim influence. Anyway, that there were no saris only in the last few hundred years. I question this because it is standard pretty much throughout India, all of North and South India. In Punjab, due to Muslim influence, many women who wear the salwar kameez. The very name suggests it's not Vedic. And again, up in Manipur, which is bordering the non-directly Indian area, again, the cultures of it, even the language is different. It's very widely spread. It has been for at least the last few hundred years. So I question it. But one point Hrdayananda Maharaj makes is that when he says variety is the mother of enjoyment, so why should we think that in the spiritual world that the dress style and other features of the culture are more restricted than in the present world, when we're just living in a tiny planet with a tiny fragment of time in Kali Yuga, the worst time. So shouldn't we think that in the spiritual world there's more variety? Maybe not exactly. The culture seems to be fairly fixed. Krishna's Leela, it's full of variety, but the variety is more in the dealings, or the nuances and the subtleties of the dealings. Otherwise, Krishna's Leela, there are varieties with him, but it's fairly fixed. Krishna gets born, and then he grows up and goes to Mathura, and he goes to Dwaraka. The Leela is fairly fixed. And the variety, as I said, it's like, we could say like in music, the raga and the alap. The raga is fixed, but then the musician can make the raga, or the basic scale is fixed, but then within that, the expert musician makes the various improvisations, which shows his own expertise and has variety. So it is fairly fixed, and we see that throughout at least recent history, the pictures of Krishna Of course, there may be variety in paintings, there may be regional variations, and there has been Muslim influence in that also, but basically the descriptions that various poets make of Krishna and the painting, it's pretty much the same style. We don't find Krishna dressed in paintings of Krishna dressed in anything which we might call non-Indian. So, there's a specific culture described in Shastra. Now, there is plenty of variety in what it's said that in for instance, what Krishna eats. That's an important part of Krishna consciousness, right? And Krishna's eating. Here in Chaitanya Charitamrita we find descriptions of dozens of preparations being served to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, both by Advaita Acharya and by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So lots of preparations. But at the same time, it said of Radharani that she cooks daily for Krishna. She never cooks, she always cooks different things. Although a description is given, Shukta Shakadi Bhaji Nalita Pushpa. There's some basic varieties within, there may be some change to that also, and within the basic variety. Because we don't find, for instance, Krishna is eating chips and tomato ketchup, or pizza for that matter. Although cakes are described, it's in traditional Indian cooking, it's a different kind of cake to the kind of cakes which are popular in ISKCON today. It's a completely different way of cooking. So there are many, even today, although unfortunately all aspects of the very detailed Indian culture, which is Vedic culture, which is derived from the spiritual world, Vaikuntha culture. And there's so much is there, but a lot of it's being lost, including varieties of cooking. There's so many preparations are there traditionally, which would be for feasts, weddings, and festivals for the deities. So there is great variety, but it's within a certain. You looking at the clock?
No.
What's the time? Supposed to be the time now? 9 o'clock. So, we say sari and dhoti, well, it may not be exactly the way that we see worn today, but that it is, and these are anyway generic terms. Sari and dhoti. It's not like there's one exact style of dhoti or one sari, but it may be that Srila Prabhupada is using to cover all kinds of cloth or style or whatever. But a point that Hrdayananda Maharaj makes is that Srila Prabhupada's translation, it's faithful to the Siddhanta, but it's often non-literal. And actually the other acharyas do that. One word for what Srila Prabhupada calls purport, one word in Sanskrit, is bhavartha, which means what does it mean? It's difficult to say. It's the bhava means the feeling, the mood, that is the meaning of the feeling here. So it seems that the bhava maybe more important than the details. Of course, the details also Shastra describes details, so that's not inconsequential. We can't say that we can. Anyway, I'll get around to that. So, an example that Hrdayananda Maharaj gives is that Srila Prabhupada describes, Narada Muni describes in his previous life, he was singing certain kinds of songs for sense gratification. Srila Prabhupada, in the text translation, says that cinema songs, which is obviously non-literal, because cinema as we know it is a recent introduction on this planet, and certainly now everybody wasn't singing songs that were played in cinema or that we derived from cinema. Although cinema song is obviously used in this context to mean cheap romantic songs for sense gratification. But that's the point that I'm just making. It's a non-literal translation. And often Srila Prabhupada, in his translation, he blends his own commentary in to the translation. And sometimes he leaves things out which are in the Sanskrit. So, Hrdayananda makes the point that Srila Prabhupada is faithful to the Siddhanta, but it may not be exactly a literal translation. However, what are the implications of this statement? Does this give us a license to second guess everything that Srila Prabhupada says which is not directly philosophical or concerned with Siddhanta, philosophical conclusion? That conclusion could be either subtly or directly derived from saying, well, Srila Prabhupada doesn't give a non-literal translation. It could be said that, well, we don't have to accept as literal, or we don't have to accept everything that Srila Prabhupada says unless it's concerned with philosophical matters. And that leads us into various fields of Srila Prabhupada's attitudes, gender roles, for instance, which Srila Prabhupada talks about a lot, controversial subject within our society and outside our society. And within our society, the ugly head of mundane feminism has poked itself right in, and it's sometimes suggested that Srila Prabhupada's attitudes toward gender roles and considering that women should have more or less subordinate roles, that's a product of Srila Prabhupada's upbringing, which is, in one sense you could say it's true, because Srila Prabhupada was raised in a traditional Indian society, which is derived to a large extent from the pristine Indian or Vedic culture. But the implications of this, although Hrdayananda Maharaj hasn't said it in this context, but others have said it, is that Srila Prabhupada was influenced just like anyone else may be influenced by the culture around him. He's a product of his culture as much as anyone else. He's a pure devotee, but a product of his culture. Now this does again raise many theological questions. Are our acharyas, are they also influenced by the culture around them? Here by saying acharya, I don't mean someone who's got an institutional position as an acharya. I mean the pure devotees, or those who are qualified to comment on Shastra and who are guiding their own disciples, and especially if they write, they're guiding future generations of devotees also. In other words, they're supposed to be directly in contact with Krishna, and what they say is from the devotees' standpoint is Yayujyate sadavasthaya yathabhutisthadashraya. They're on the same platform as Krishna. They're not affected by the material energy. They're within the material energy, but they're not affected by it. So if we are to postulate that Srila Prabhupada is affected by material conditioning, then it raises very great points as to our whole theology and the role of the Acharya as the arbitrator of Shastric understanding, and then, well, maybe we can just read Shastra ourselves, and then we can contend that, well, many things in Shastra are allegorical, and that or the Vyasadeva himself was influenced, and where does the end of this argument go? The sanctity of Shastra and of the whole culture can be undermined. And again, I'm not saying that this was the intention of Hrdayananda Maharaj, but this argument or this observation, if it's taken to what could be considered its logical conclusion, it can lead us into very dangerous territory, because Krishna consciousness or any religious understanding is based on faith in something which is not empirically reducible. Faith in the spiritual, the transcendental. Faith that not everything can be understood simply by our brain power. That the empiric method is by its brain. Of course, our Vaishnava acharyas in particular have taken up this point very strongly, that the empiricism is inadequate to approach the absolute truth, and not only in Vaishnava acharyas but in Shastra itself. Nayamaya Atma. What is that? Pravachanena labhyo namedhyana vahuna shrutena. Right, in Shruti itself, in the Vedas, it's stated that the Atma cannot be understood simply by lectures, by discussing it, not by one's intelligence, nor by great learning, even in the Vedas. Not even by the Vedas themselves state that simply by studying by the Vedas alone one cannot understand the Vedas, even if one is vastly learned in them. Of course, this approach is belittled by empiricists who have faith in their own intelligence, and they say, well, how can you believe in anything beyond which we can touch, taste, smell, feel, hear, and on the basis of our sensual impressions, speculate about the use of the mind, intelligence, and senses. That's all we know, and everything else is unknown, and therefore it's unreliable. Therefore, we can only the empirical process, despite its flaws, it's the only process which we can rely on, and everything else is just imagination. Religion and God is imagination. So they scoff at faith in God, or even if they say, well, you have faith in God, but you have to subject it to intellectual critique and see if it stands up. And of course it can't stand up to intellectual critique, because the intellectual critique is based on the presupposition that we only accept everything which we can understand through our brain power. So definitely the spiritual cannot be understood by the material. But if we say that we can only understand the material, then it negates any possibility of there being any spiritual in it at all, and is just considered a product of the imagination. So it's there's a great rift between the materialists and the spiritualists, and an over-literal approach that can lead us into atheism. It's a dangerous kind of approach. On one hand, we can say, all right, we see here the word sari and dhoti is not in Srimad Bhagavatam. On the other hand, our Acharya says Krishna wears the dhoti. So we also see that our Acharya says that Narada Muni was singing cinema songs. So, which is only one example of many actually. So, does that mean that therefore everything that Prabhupada said which isn't exactly corroborated by the original Sanskrit text, is that up for reinterpretation? And even the Sanskrit text itself, it may be understood to be allegorical, or it may be that the writers, they were also writing according to their own culture without understanding of the great wonderful strides we've made in modern intellectualism, so maybe we have to reassess it according to our the great strides we've made in textual analysis, and etc., etc., etc. So, it can be very dangerous, and then if anyone would have dared, which is unlikely in the presence of Srila Prabhupada, to raise such points, it's unlikely because people are afraid of Prabhupada. It's very heavy. And Srila Prabhupada was setting the Maryada, which means the limit. It literally means limit, and it's also used in the sense of etiquette. That one should know what is Maryada, what is the limits, how far can you go. And this term is used in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Maryada Langhan, jumping over the limit, going beyond the bounds of proper propriety. So it would have been considered impertinent also. And how far should you or can you question the Guru? Because in traditional Indian culture, the position of the Guru is considered sacred. And that Krishna himself establishes. Acharya mam vijaniya nagamanyeta karichit namartya buddhya sunyeta sarvadeva maya guru. Lord Krishna, speaking about the Guru, says that the Acharya should be considered as me. Should be considered to be me. The Guru is me. Of course, this is to be understood in the philosophy of Achintya Bheda Tattva. The Guru is not Krishna in all respects, but he is, when he speaks, it's as good as Krishna speaking. That's to be accepted. That's the point. One should not insult him, one should not disregard him or disrespect him, one should not consider him an ordinary mortal, because he's the representative of all the demigods, or all the demigods, they worship him. The position of the Guru is above the demigods, as Srila Prabhupada himself. When someone asked Srila Prabhupada that, do you sometimes go to see the demigods? And Prabhupada became a little upset and said, why? Why should I go to see the demigods? They come to see me. Why should I go and see them? The position of the demigods is very insignificant in relation to pure devotee Krishna. Prabhupada explained that also. He said, just like if you're a friend of the king, if you need any favor, or if you need anything, you don't go to them, you don't bother with them, you don't go to the ministers. Rather, if they need a favor from you, they'll come to you. They don't have direct access to the king, but you do because you're his friend. So your position is, even though you may not have an official post in the management, your position is actually much more important and more influential. So the Guru is the via media to understand Shastra and everything in it. Now, this can raise problems when sometimes it's seen that the Guru says something which is apparently wrong. As for instance, in Srila Prabhupada's books, there are some technical mistakes. For instance, in stating the number of soldiers that were killed at Kurukshetra, Prabhupada, according to the Shastra description, he increases it by an increment of 10 times more. So there are some technical mistakes there. Definitely no mistakes in Siddhanta. Some mistakes have come through via the non-perfect medium of his disciples in the course of editing, transcribing. For instance, in that purport where Srila Prabhupada says one should not make any disciples, I looked at, this is taken from Srila Bhakti. This purport was taken from Bhaktivedanta Saraswati purport, in which Bhaktivedanta Saraswati says one should accept disciples. So I asked the archives to check it, and lo and behold, it's an editor's mistake. It's somehow or other it says the word not, because Prabhupada is, which is often used by the Ritvidvadis. But it's actually a mistake. If you see the original transcription, Prabhupada is saying one should accept disciples. And it's a major point. Sometimes in the books, even now, there may be something which Prabhupada didn't say. But even among the things that Prabhupada said, there may be some technical mistakes. So it does raise very delicate theological points. And delicate means fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Don't make conclusions very quickly. Or sometimes the acharyas, they appear to contradict themselves. Often, even in the Bhagavatam itself, there are Sanskrit composition is not exactly according to the rules, and that's which is considered a very wrong thing to do in Sanskrit. But then the acharyas, in describing that, they say this is the Arsha Prayog. That's the great souls have risen thus. That's all. In other words, pointing out what might be considered a mistake and just pointing it out. This usage is of Arsha Prayog. They're written like that. In other words, it's a mistake from the Sanskrit point of view, but it's not called a mistake. It's not said, well, actually the Sanskrit's wrong, it should be like this. They say the great souls have thus written, stated. That's the culture. You know, they say, well, Srila Prabhupada made this mistake and that mistake and that. No. Anyone who says like that, they make a mistake. It's very offensive, actually, to say that even if, according to all everything we can see and understand, it is a mistake. You don't say it's a mistake. That's called culture. It's something which is lacking in the modern world and among empiricists in general, and people who take the empiric approach, and it is a complete block to understanding the transcendental. So, this approach, of course, this will be scoffed at by the transcendental, but the non-transcendentalists, by the empiricists, they make so many mistakes and then they just say divine. And they're just ordinary people who are making mistakes. And they'll say that. But then their lives are dry, they have no God, they have no rasa, they on the chariots of their minds, which leads them to round and round in a merry-go-round of lust, greed, anger, envy, illusion. What's the actual result of empiricism? That one is very proud of one's own intelligence, but that's it. You're stuck in the material world. And one of the 2 points that Srila Prabhupada particularly stood out at, the 2 points I would say are the basis of Srila Prabhupada's whole preaching to the world. One is that we're not the body, and number 2 is that there is a controller. We are controlled. We're not the body, there is spirit, and there is a supreme spirit. And then everything else is on the basis of these 2 points. So these Srila Prabhupada explained very logically, and then so if we want to accept logically, then these 2 points, it's highly acceptable. But the details, what is the nature of spirit, what is the nature of God, that we have to learn from Shastra, actually from the via media of the pure devotees. So, what else? Just a few minutes. My position is that, well, if Srila Prabhupada sees Krishna in a dhoti and the gopis in the sari, well, I'm quite happy with that, and I don't want to see any other way, because if that's the way Prabhupada sees, and Prabhupada's given Chakudana Diloje Janme Janme Prabhu said, he's my guru, and if he sees Krishna like that, he's going to show Krishna to me, and I'll take Krishna the way he gives Krishna to me. I'm not going to try and find out Krishna in any different way, more intelligent way. I have to be fully satisfied with that, and I can't think that Prabhupada is cheating me because he didn't show me Krishna wearing something else. This is the devotional attitude. That whatever our guru is, that's what we take. We have faith that he is not cheating us, he's giving us everything. So, that faith is required, that Prabhupada can give us Krishna, he knows everything. We don't make we don't get into, well, this mistake, this might not be correct, that might not be correct. Again, there may be some grounds for that, but there may be grounds for dealing with scholars, but one way is just saying, to hell with you. You got your outlook, which is leading you round and round in the material world, and we have our outlook, which leads us to the spiritual world. So you don't have faith, well, we don't have faith in your process either. Your process is very limited. And so, it may not be necessary to get into all the details of every single supposed non-literal statement that Prabhupada made, and then try and analyze it, and what is the meaning of this, and what is Prabhupada's position? Is he a 19th century Bengali influenced, and Prabhupada's a pure devotee of Krishna, that's how we know him. This is the devotional outlook by which one can make devotional progress. And the empiric approach is maybe intellectually appealing to some people, although we have our own intellectual field also. But it is very dangerous. So I didn't rebut, in this little talk, I didn't attempt to rebut what Hrdayananda Maharaj says about this, but it's not a rebuttal, and probably maybe there is no rebuttal, because like I say, it's a different approach altogether. It's on the platform that the question is raised, there is maybe no rebuttal. Yeah, because saris and dhotis, the word isn't in Srimad Bhagavatam, so how do you rebut that? Maybe there isn't any rebuttal. But then on the devotional platform, what Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to give us, it's not. Srimad Bhagavatam wasn't written by Srila Vyasa so that some scholars in Oxford University could come along and get their PhDs studying it and finding out all the so-called faults in it. It's not meant for them at all. Aham vedi nishtuko veti Vyasa veti na veti va. Bhaktya bhagavata brahya namedya nachatikaya. Lord Shiva says that I know, Shukdev Gosvami knows, maybe Vyasadeva knows, maybe not, the Prabhupada and Bhagavatam. But whatever, the Bhagavatam is not to be understood, it is by bhakti one can understand. Not simply by one's intelligence, or even by writing or studying commentaries. That also, that in itself is the devotional attitudes required. So I finished. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
It's not so much a question, Prabhu, but two very short comments, if I may.
Do we have another mic?
Sorry, can you not hear me?
I can hear you, but others might not be able to hear you.
Okay, to begin with, this problem with this Nokia sari. According to archaeologists, what archaeologists believe that, or they have actually found evidence that the Aryans, when they came to the Indus Valley about 30,000 years ago.
Rubbish. The idea that the Aryans came from outside is already rebutted.
They came from, according to archaeologists.
Yeah, according to archaeologists. They're talking rubbish. This theory was invented by the Westerners as part of their strategy to undermine Vedic culture. When they came to India, they found an ancient culture with a highly sophisticated language. In fact, the study of grammar, there was no study of grammar in the Western world until the Westerners came to India and saw that there was study of grammar in Sanskrit and how sophisticated it was. And they, in their jingoism, or their everything in the West is best. The West is best, Christianity is best, and especially everything British is best. And especially everything English is best, and especially everything in Southern England is best. In the London area. London, Cambridge, Oxford, and anything outside that stinks. They were, many Westerners, when they came to India, they were fascinated by the culture, and they found how, and even materially, just like for instance, there's that Ashok Stupa in Delhi.
Yes.
Even now, the scientists, they don't know how it's standing up or how it hasn't rusted. There are many things all over the world, and just like the pyramids, they have no idea how it's there. And the standard of astronomy in ancient India, even years before the Copernicus and company started looking through their telescopes, they had advanced astronomy. There were so many things, and they were envious, and they made a strategy to undermine them. The chairs of Indology at Oxford and Cambridge, I don't know if they started in Cambridge, they were deliberately, with the specific purpose of undermining the Vedic culture. There were so many things, just like they found the weavers in Dhaka, now in Bangladesh, they could make such fine cloth, much better than anything from the Lancashire mills. So they wanted to sell it, they took the cotton from India, sent it to Lancashire, spun it there in their mills and sent it back to India. But why should they buy it? Because they had much better local. So they solved that problem by cutting off the thumbs of the weavers.
That's understood.
I'm just showing that this Aryan invasion theory is based on envy, and it has been pretty much thrown out. If you're up to date on all these things, it's rebutted. Of course, there are still some old school people going on with it, but in the next generation it cannot be accepted because it's got nothing to stand on. Another example someone recently told me is that there are knives you can still see in Mysore, in the palace, certain kind of knives that will just cut through stone. And there are many things, but a lot of it's been covered up. But the British, they saw this and they wanted the caste of people to tell them how to do it. They said, no, it's a sacred principle that this is only passed on within our caste. They wouldn't tell it, so they killed them all, and now no one knows how to make them. So this is the kind of background from which the Aryan invasion theory came from. I can give you references for this if you want to study it more. If you want.
Well, on the other hand, also there is, I don't know if you subscribe to Homo sapiens. This here is Homo sapiens.
Homo sapiens means intelligent man, bunch of idiots. The very idea of Homo sapiens and what was before that, Homo erectus and there's another rubbish idea that we've all descended from monkeys. I read in the Encyclopedia Britannica that monkeys, they used to go around on 4 paws, and then they reach up sometimes to the trees to get the fruit, and those who were taller they could get the fruit better, and then they started standing on two legs, and that's how we became human beings. That's in Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not sapient. That's damn, it's
in that case,
damn stupid.
How does one explain, for example, that in our blood group, it's not sufficient to say that my blood group is A or AB or something like that. I have to say also research positive or research negative. Now, this research refers to AIDS.
Well,
where did it come from?
Everything, just like the scientists, they're trying to find a unified, one theory to explain everything. Here's a theory to explain everything. There is a supreme controller who designed everything and put everything in place and holds everything in place. It's the perfect theory in which every scientific discovery can fit into that theory, but they won't accept it because asatya bhaktishtante jagadahuraniswaram, they're demons. By the very nature of demoniac people, as Lord Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita, is that they won't accept that there is an ultimate underlying principle which is controlled by the supreme controller.
I'm sorry to take that attitude, but this is not quite.
Oh, well, I'm not sorry. You are sorry, but I'm very happy because this is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. And there is a supreme controller. Everything is controlled. Just like, for instance, there comes a time of day, unless you have severe constipation like me, in which most people, they feel an overwhelming need to evacuate what they ate yesterday. And you can't control it. And you can't control death. You have to die. We are controlled. There is a supreme controller.
Forgive me, but this attitude, I think,
well, you can think whatever you like.
Well, it permeates through.
Excuse me, in other words, you mean that you should say what you like. Everyone has a right to say what they like. Here we're saying what Krishna likes.
If I can have a word in
this is the Srimad Bhagavatam class. I'm not sure if it's worth it.
Well, what I was going to say was, in the highest realm of science, for example, in quantum physics, there the two conclusions. One
conclusion? They came to a conclusion? Quantum physics? They came to a conclusion? Really? Wow. Okay, let's give you the Nobel Prize.
Excuse me, sir, let me explain. First one is very much similar to the one you mentioned about.
Are you a physicist, by the way?
No, I'm not a physicist.
Do you understand quantum physics?
I do.
Really?
Yes.
Really? You can say that?
I teach it actually.
But you're not a physicist?
Sorry?
You're not a physicist?
Well, I'm a mathematician, but I've taken a lot of interest in physics also.
I see. You're not a physicist, but you teach physics.
Excuse me, sir.
It's not every scientist who would agree with you that they have solved. I mean, there are so many unsolved problems in quantum physics also, right?
Yes, of course, yes.
Of course.
Yes. But the thing is, you see, you mentioned this empiricist theory. That is very much well appreciated in quantum physics. But at the same time, what you did not say, and which is very important, is that there is also the concept of subjectivism.
Which comes in modern science, yeah. In
quantum
physics.
Subjectivism simply says that this world, you cannot judge it by what one possesses or what are the material characteristics or material designs. What it concerns with primarily is who you are, how you relate to your fellow beings, and finally, how you relate to what is called the universal consciousness. In science, we don't speak of God.
Yes, because they're atheistic demons. We can't do the same thing.
The idea of universal consciousness is one to which our individual consciousness is linked.
Yeah, alright. Yes. It's called, in ancient Indian philosophy, it's called Mayavad.
Sorry?
It's called Mayavad.
Nothing of this sort, no. According to Vivekananda, for example.
Well, alright, thank you very much. I think we'll stop there. Vivekananda was another rascal. I know you don't like that, but it's true. He was a meat eater, and he said so many wrong things. His own guru ate human flesh and beef and so many things.
Sorry, who are you speaking about?
Ramakrishna, so-called Paramahamsa.
Well, certainly your point of view.
No, my point of view is documented.
I don't know where you got this particular...
I can give you the reference if you want.
Sorry?
He himself, he practiced every religion, right? So when he was a Christian, he was eating beef. When he was practicing Tantra, he had human flesh, as Tantrics do. So if that's what you want to follow, and if you think that's very good, alright. Up to you. I can give you the references if you want.
Yes, I've heard something like that, but I'm not particularly following Ramakrishna or anything.
Alright, then don't quote me. Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj ki
Jai!
Oh yeah, I have books here. Srila Prabhupada told me to write books, so I'm writing books. Including my memories of Srila Prabhupada, in which there's an essay which is, what does it say? On speaking strongly in Srila Prabhupada's service. I'm not so bad up with all he's telling me.